On the brisk morning of January 4th, 1989, the USS John F. Kennedy, CV-67, cut a determined path through the rough winter swells of the Mediterranean Sea, some 70 miles north of Libya's coast. The sky overhead was a dull slate gray, and the wind carried a bite, reminding every sailor aboard that despite the Kennedy's massive size and power, the sea was still king. Inside the ship, deep below the heaving flight deck, Ready Room 4 hummed with a low, tense energy. It was here that two F-14 Tomcat crews from VF-32 Swordsmen gathered around their mission maps, eyes scanning, fingers tracing invisible lines across Libyan airspace. The air in the Ready Room was thick with the scent of black coffee, flight suits, and a tangible sense of unease. Conversations were hushed, clipped. Every man present understood that this was not a routine patrol. Memories of past confrontations loomed heavily. Captain Joseph Smokin' Joe Connolly, a seasoned and respected radar intercept officer, RIO, with years of experience under his belt, leaned in toward his pilot, his voice low but firm. "Remember," he said, tapping the map with a calloused finger. "Gaddafi's boys are still licking their wounds from last year when we crossed his so-called line of death. They're jumpy, nervous. They're looking for any excuse to make noise. Stay sharp. Trust your instincts." The young pilot, Lieutenant Commander Mike "Iceman" Rivers, nodded silently, his jaw set, his eyes betraying none of the adrenaline beginning to stir within him. He adjusted his oxygen mask absently as he continued studying the threat zones. Each marker on the map represented a Libyan airfield, a SAM site, a radar installation, each a potential flashpoint in a region already simmering with resentment and distrust. Time ticked by slowly, the minutes dragging as the ship's Combat Information Center, CIC, monitored Libyan frequencies and surface activity. The carrier battle group maintained high alert, every radar sweeping the skies, every operator leaning in a little closer to their screens. Then, at precisely 11:55 a.m., a voice crackled over the internal comms system, urgent, professional, but unmistakably tense. "E2C Hawkeye to all units. We have 2 new contacts. Bogies lifting off from Al-Bumba Airfield, heading north-northwest. Speed, Mach 1.2. Altitude, climbing through 8,000 feet. In Ready Room 4, the atmosphere snapped taut. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. All eyes turned toward the nearest status monitor. The 2 blips appeared there, small, almost innocuous green specks moving steadily toward the heart of the carrier group. Within seconds, the Ready Room transformed from a place of quiet preparation to one of swift, silent action. Flight helmets were grabbed, gloves pulled on, checklists mentally reviewed. The adrenaline that had simmered beneath the surface now surged through the veins of the pilots and RIOs like an electric current. Captain Connolly locked eyes with his pilot. "That's them," he said grimly. "They're coming straight for us." On the flight deck above, ground crews scrambled to prepare the F-14 Tomcats for an immediate launch. The catapults hissed and steamed, jets rumbled to life, and the yellow-shirted flight directors gestured urgently in the swirling, freezing mist. In the Combat Information Center, officers quickly evaluated the new threat. The bogies had taken off from a known Libyan military installation near Tobruk, a city that had long been a focal point of regional tension. Their speed and trajectory left little doubt. They were not simply conducting a routine patrol. They were closing fast, and they were armed. The Kennedy's battle group was not caught off guard. Rules of engagement ROE had been carefully crafted in anticipation of just such an encounter. Warnings would be issued, visual identification would be attempted, and only then, if the threat persisted, would weapons be authorized. Still, no one aboard the carrier had any illusions. In the split-second arena of air combat, intentions could shift in an instant, and hesitation could mean death. Below deck, Connolly gave his pilot a firm pat on the shoulder as they moved toward the hatch leading up to the flight deck. "Let's go dance," he said with a thin smile. Above them, on the icy steel deck of the USS John F. Kennedy, the air was filled with the deafening roar of afterburners and the bitter sting of jet exhaust. As the two Tomcats taxied into position, their pilots steeled themselves for what lay ahead. Somewhere across the rolling gray sea, two enemy aircraft, still unknown but certainly hostile, streaked toward them with deadly intent. The trap was set. The hunter and the hunted, perhaps interchangeable in the next few minutes, raced toward a fateful meeting point, 20,000 feet above a cold, restless Mediterranean. The players' U.S. forces. At the heart of the American response were the formidable F-14A Tomcats, two of which had been launched from the flight deck of the USS John F. Kennedy under the call signs Gypsy 207 and Gypsy 202. These carrier-based interceptors, iconic symbols of U.S. naval air power, were specifically designed for dominance in the air-to-air arena. With their sweeping wings, twin engines, and menacing profile, the F-14s were more than just aircraft. They were flying weapons platforms, built to seek out and destroy enemy threats long before they could reach the fleet. Each Tomcat carried a carefully selected arsenal optimized for flexibility and lethality. The primary long-range punch came from the AIM-7 Sparrow missiles, radar-guided weapons capable of locking onto targets at considerable distances and striking with deadly precision. These medium-range missiles were guided semi-actively by the aircraft's own radar system, making them especially effective against high-speed, maneuvering threats. Complementing the Sparrows were the M9L Sidewinder missiles, heat-seeking killers designed for close-range dogfighting. The Lima variant was particularly feared, capable of engaging enemy aircraft from any angle, thanks to its all-aspect infrared seeker. A flash of engine heat was all it needed to deliver a swift, terminal blow. Central to the Tomcat's unmatched aerial prowess was the AN/AWG-9 radar system, a technological marvel of its time. This massive radar array, housed in the F-14's distinctive nose cone, could track up to 24 targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 100 miles. In an age when most fighter radars could manage only a handful of locks at once, the AWG-9 was a true force multiplier, enabling Tomcat crews to maintain situational awareness even in the densest aerial battle spaces. With this system, the Tomcats were not just hunters. They were guardians of the carrier group, standing ready to eliminate threats before they could close within missile range. The crews who manned these aircraft were every bit as formidable as their machines. Naval aviators, rigorously trained and relentlessly drilled, worked in seamless tandem, pilots controlling the flight and tactics, while radar intercept officers, RIOs, managed the sensors, communications, and weapons systems. It was a ballet of trust, skill, and nerves, one that few enemy forces could match. Libyan forces, facing off against the American strike fighters, were two MiG-23 Floggers, agile and aggressive Soviet-built interceptors, launched from Libya's Al-Bumbah airfield near Tobruk. The MiG-23 was one of the Soviet Union's answers to Western air superiority, a swing-wing fighter designed for speed, climb rate, and direct engagement. When configured for interception, its wings swept fully back, allowing it to achieve blistering speeds and high-G maneuvers. When dogfighting demanded tighter turns, the wings could sweep forward, increasing lift and agility at lower speeds. Each Libyan MiG-23 was armed with AA-7 Apex missiles, radar-guided air-to-air weapons developed by the Soviet Union for medium-range engagements. Although not as advanced as American missiles like the Sparrow or Sidewinder, the Apex posed a significant threat when employed properly, particularly in a head-on attack scenario where its radar homing capabilities could be brought to bear quickly against a target. Intelligence reports suggested that the Libyan pilots were veterans, quite possibly trained either directly by Soviet advisors or at Soviet-aligned training centers. These were not mere local conscripts. They were men who had spent years studying the doctrines of air combat, familiar with interception tactics, radar evasion, and missile employment. Their training emphasized quick reaction times, aggressive approaches, and adherence to ground-controlled interception protocols, a system in which ground stations guided the pilots onto their targets with precision vectoring. Libya's air forces at the time had been heavily modernized with Soviet assistance. Gaddafi's regime spared no expense in acquiring capable machinery and, just as importantly, the technical knowledge to wield it. As such, encounters with Libyan pilots were never treated lightly by American forces. In the tight split-second world of jet combat, the margin between life and death often depended on who could bring their weapons to bear first, and with greater discipline. While the MiG-23s lacked some of the sophisticated sensor fusion and multi-target engagement capabilities of the F-14s, they were still dangerous adversaries. Their raw speed, combined with the element of political unpredictability, meant that every intercept had the potential to escalate rapidly into a deadly engagement. The dance, 11:58 to 12. At precisely 11:57 a.m., the catapults aboard USS John F. Kennedy, CV-67, thundered as they hurled two sleek F-14A Tomcats skyward into the frigid Mediterranean air. The fighters, call signs Gypsy 207 and Gypsy 202, climbed rapidly, afterburners glowing against the gray horizon, before banking eastward toward the radar contacts. Inside, the cockpits, a well-honed rhythm set in, system checks, radar sweeps, comms with the E-2C Hawkeye overhead. Just a minute into the flight, the Libyan contacts, a pair of MiG-23 Floggers, made an unmistakable move. Breaking from their original course, they turned directly toward the Tomcats. The pivot was aggressive, decisive. Inside Gypsy 207, Captain Joseph "Smokin' Joe" Connolly, riding back seat as the radar intercept officer, RIO, called it in without hesitation. "Hostile intent confirmed. They're turning hot on us." The rules of engagement were clear. A hostile maneuver against U.S. forces, especially near the line of death, meant they were fair game. No further warnings were required. Connolly's hands moved fluidly over the radar controls. At 38 miles, his ANAWG-9 radar system locked solidly onto both MiGs. The Tomcats' tracking symbology lit up the display. Two targets, distinct and steady, flying fast and low. The dance had begun. Both sides jockeyed for the advantage. At this range and closure speed, the time for talking was over. Now it was all about positioning, speed, and nerve. The American pilots throttled up, climbing slightly to maintain radar coverage while monitoring the MiGs' every move. The Libyans, meanwhile, prepared for their next gambit, a maneuver designed to shake off American radar locks and disrupt missile guidance. Phase 2. The fight, 12:00 to 12:02. At the stroke of 12 p.m., the engagement entered its second phase. The MiG-23 pilots, realizing they were locked and vulnerable at altitude, slammed their throttles forward and pitched their noses down. Both Libyan jets descended rapidly, diving to near wavetop level, less than 200 feet above the sea, hoping to exploit radar clutter from the ocean surface to mask their movements and break the Tomcats' targeting solutions. In Gypsy 207, Lieutenant Hermann the German Cook, the pilot, grunted as he pushed the stick forward to follow the MiG's sudden drop. The sea rushed up toward them in the heads-up display. Staying low and fast, Cook stayed in pursuit, maintaining the radar lock despite the Libyans' evasive tactics. Cook had the solution. As the MiGs leveled out at wave-top altitude, he maneuvered into firing parameters. He squeezed the trigger, launching an AIM-7 Sparrow at a range of 12 miles. The missile streaked off the rail with a shriek of burning fuel, cutting a brilliant path through the thick, salt-laden air. But the Libyan lead pilot had nerves of steel. Spotting the inbound Sparrow, he yanked his MiG into a brutal, gut-wrenching 7G brake turn. The MiG's wings flexed dangerously, and vapor trails spiraled off the control surfaces as the aircraft whipped into a high-speed defensive maneuver. The Sparrow's seeker, unable to maintain its radar lock under such extreme angular change, missed wide. The missile screamed harmlessly past and plunged into the Mediterranean. Inside the Tomcat, Cook and Connolly barely flinched. They knew better than to expect the first shot to always land. They pressed their advantage, preparing for the inevitable close-range knife fight. Phase 3. The kill, 12:02:30 to 12:03. The engagement now entered its final lethal phase. Commander Leo Bandit Enright, piloting Gypsy 202, was moving in fast behind the maneuvering Libyans. He closed the distance to within 4 miles, well inside visual range. Through the canopy, Enright could now clearly see the silver-gray silhouettes of the MiGs slicing low over the sea, their afterburners flaring against the cold Mediterranean light. Enright's targeting system sang in his headset, a clean, steady tone, the unmistakable signature of a perfect Sidewinder lock. "Fox 2!" Enright barked into the radio, thumbing the launch button. An AIM-9L Sidewinder leapt from his wing pylon with a sudden burst of speed, its infrared seeker locked onto the glowing exhaust of the lead MiG. There was no escape. The Sidewinder streaked forward, weaving slightly as it homed in. Seconds later, it struck the MiG's fuselage just aft of the cockpit. A brilliant fireball erupted, the aircraft breaking apart violently in midair. Pieces of flaming debris spiraled into the sea below, vanishing into the foam and smoke. It was 12:03 p.m. The second Libyan pilot, seeing his wingman destroyed, refused to flee. Instead, he banked sharply, turning aggressively toward Cook's Tomcat in an apparent attempt to engage directly. It was a fatal error. Cook and Connolly, still riding hard and fast, reacted instantly. As the MiG closed the distance, Connolly achieved another solid lock. Cook rolled the Tomcat slightly, slewing his seeker onto the closing target. Again, the targeting tone sang. "Fox 2!" came the call, almost routine now. Another AIM-9L Sidewinder tore from the launcher, straight and true. The missile arced upward slightly, then dove toward the MiG's exposed tailpipe, homing with deadly accuracy. The impact was catastrophic. The missile detonated inside the MiG's exposed tailpipe, homing with deadly accuracy. The impact was catastrophic. The missile detonated inside the MiG's engine compartment. Fire and debris exploded outward, trailing black smoke. The Libyan pilot managed to eject a split second before the flaming wreckage plunged into the sea. A small, dark parachute blossomed against the smoky sky as the pilot descended toward the cold Mediterranean waters below. By 12:04 p.m., the engagement was over. 2 MiGs destroyed. No American aircraft damaged. A textbook engagement, swift, disciplined, devastating. The pilots of VF-32 had once again proven that skill, training, and cold nerves could dominate even the most unpredictable battles. Aftermath, the pilot's perspective. As the smoke from the downed MiGs drifted into the choppy Mediterranean air, a heavy reflective silence settled over the skies. Inside the cockpits of the victorious F-14 Tomcats, the adrenaline still surged, but the deadly urgency of combat had begun to ebb, replaced by a somber sense of finality. They had done their duty. Now came the reckoning. Later, Lieutenant Hermann the German Cook, pilot of Gypsy 207, would give a stark, visceral account of what he witnessed in those closing seconds. His voice, calm but weighted with the memory, captured the brutal clarity of aerial warfare. "When that flogger came apart," Cook recalled in an interview some months later, "I saw the ejection seat tumbling through the debris cloud, then nothing but an oil slick where he'd hit the water. There was no joy in the kill. only a grim acknowledgement of what it meant. 2 young men had gone to war that day. One survived by a thread. The other was lost beneath the cold waves. In an era when missiles flew faster than thought and decisions were measured in split seconds, the line between life and death was razor-thin and merciless. The entire engagement, from the moment the F-14 left the flight deck of the John F. Kennedy to the final splashdown of wreckage, had taken just 8 minutes. 8 minutes to transform from routine patrol to lethal confrontation. 8 minutes to reaffirm why naval aviators trained endlessly, drilled mercilessly, and lived under the constant knowledge that, at any moment, they might be called upon to fight and win. 90 minutes after the intercept, Libyan search and rescue aircraft combed the area north of Tobruk. They found only broken fragments bobbing on the sea, shredded metal, burned composite panels, and oil slicks marking the violent end of the MiG-23s. There were no pilots waving from rafts, no beacons signaling survival, just the silence of the open water and the ghosts of war. Why this matters to your audience. For viewers who lived through the Cold War era, this encounter resonates far beyond the technicalities of air combat. It represents a flashpoint, a moment when the simmering tensions between East and West, democracy and dictatorship, played out in vivid, deadly color over the Mediterranean. Cold War flashpoint. This was the last confirmed air-to-air combat between U.S. and Libyan forces, a final violent echo of a decade marked by Muammar Gaddafi's provocations and America's firm resolve to defend freedom of navigation. For those who remember the 1980s, it brings back memories of news bulletins flashing with headlines like "Line of Death," of American aircraft challenging arbitrary territorial claims, and of an unpredictable world balanced precariously on the brink of larger conflict. Technical showcase. The engagement also served as a stunning demonstration of the F-14 Tomcats' dominance over Soviet-era designs. At a time when the world's military balance was uncertain, this encounter proved that American technology, tactics, and training still reigned supreme. 2 kills, no losses, executed cleanly, efficiently, and decisively. The engagement showcased how investments in avionics, radar technology, missile systems, and pilot training paid off when it mattered most. Human drama. The pilots themselves were young, average age 28, yet tasked with decisions carrying life or death consequences. In mere seconds, they navigated from lock-on to missile release, from combat maneuvering to survival instincts honed over hundreds of hours of training. They bore the weight of their country's expectations with remarkable professionalism. It was not about glory, it was about duty, honor, and the immense responsibility carried by those entrusted with lethal power. Veteran connection. For many in your audience, particularly those who served or who watched the world change during the 1980s, this story strikes a deeply personal chord. They will remember Gaddafi's frequent provocations, including declaring vast swaths of the Mediterranean as Libyan waters, challenging international norms. The TopGun era, when U.S. naval aviation captured the national imagination and pride, celebrated not just in Hollywood but in every American heart that beat for freedom. The 1986 El Dorado Canyon raids, when American air power struck back against Libyan-sponsored terrorism, cementing Gaddafi's image as a global troublemaker and reinforcing the need for readiness at sea. This was more than a skirmish. It was a symbol of American resolve in a dangerous world. The machines that made history F-14. Tomcat, the Grumman F-14. Tomcat was, in many ways, the ultimate embodiment of Cold War air superiority at sea. Its specifications still command respect: maximum speed, Mach 2.34, about 1,544 miles per hour, allowing it to outpace and outclimb almost any opponent of its era. Variable sweep wings, a technological marvel, automatically adjusting in flight, swept back for high-speed dashes, extended forward for low-speed maneuvering and dogfighting. Unit cost, approximately $38 million in 1989 dollars, a massive investment, but one that delivered unmatched performance. Older viewers will recall the pride of seeing Tomcats soaring overhead, watching them dominate air shows, and knowing they guarded the fleet with unmatched capability. MiG-23 Flogger. By contrast, the Soviet-built MiG-23 Flogger was a study in compromises. Designed as the Soviet answer to the American F-4 Phantom, the MiG-23 brought speed and climb rate but suffered significant shortcomings. Its radar systems were notoriously unreliable, especially when operating over water, where ground clutter and sea surface reflections caused frequent failures. Pilot visibility was poor, with the cockpit canopy limiting situational awareness, an unforgivable flaw in the high-speed chaos of a dogfight. Libyan pilots, even those Soviet-trained, often expressed frustration with the MiG-23's unpredictable handling and lackluster radar. A side-by-side cockpit comparison showing the sophisticated displays and wide viewing angles of the F-14 next to the cramped, minimalistic instrumentation of the MiG-23 would dramatically highlight the technological disparity that defined the outcome of this encounter. In the aftermath of that fateful encounter high over the Mediterranean, the ripples of the dogfight between American F-14 Tomcats and Libyan MiG-23s spread far beyond the cold waters where twisted wreckage had sunk. It marked more than just the end of an engagement. It symbolized the waning of an era, the twilight of a specific type of warfare where pilots fought not from miles away via drones, but in the brutal intimacy of gun sights, missile locks, and lightning-fast maneuvers. As the 1990s dawned, change swept across the world, and Libya, once an eager participant in Cold War confrontation, found itself increasingly isolated. Economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations and United States, punishing Libya for its role in supporting terrorism, crippled Gaddafi's military capabilities. The once proud squadrons of Libyan MiG-23 Floggers, those same aircraft that had faced American jets over the Mediterranean, gradually fell silent. By the mid-1990s, Libya's remaining MiG-23 fleet was grounded, rusting on the tarmac. Spares became impossible to obtain. Training hours dwindled to almost nothing. Ground crews cannibalized some jets to keep a handful flying for ceremonial purposes, but the Air Force that had once challenged the U.S. Navy now became a relic of a bygone era, its wings clipped not by combat, but by political isolation and logistical decay. Meanwhile, in America, time was also catching up with the mighty F-14 Tomcat. Despite its unparalleled combat record and cultural icon status, immortalized in films like Top Gun, the Tomcat's complex maintenance requirements and soaring operational costs made it a victim of modernization efforts. By 2006, the U.S. Navy reluctantly retired the last of its F-14s, replacing them with the newer, more versatile F/A-18EF Super Hornets. Squadrons that once flew the Tomcat, symbols of raw speed, power, and aerial dominance, conducted their final ceremonial flybys, saluting a legend that had protected carrier groups for over 3 decades. Today, the only operational F-14s remain in Iran, a curious legacy of pre-revolution arms sales to the Shah in the 1970s. There, aging Tomcats are kept alive through ingenuity, cannibalized parts, and local improvisation, a ghostly echo of the aircraft's former glory days aboard American supercarriers. The story of the Libyan MiG-23s and the American Tomcats found its final chapter during the Arab Spring of 2011. As the Libyan civil war erupted against the Gaddafi regime, many of Libya's surviving aircraft, those that hadn't already succumbed to age and disrepair, were destroyed on the ground. Airfields once bristling with Soviet fighters were reduced to graveyards of crumpled aluminum and blackened concrete. The long-defunct MiG-23s, symbols of a dictatorship's military ambitions, found their final fate not in battle, but under the hammer blows of revolution. 2011, Libya's final fall from the skies. The Libyan Air Force, crippled for decades, met its final undoing during the 2011 Arab Spring uprisings. As the Gaddafi regime faced a massive popular revolt, NATO air forces intervened to prevent mass civilian casualties. In a matter of weeks, what remained of Libya's air capability was utterly destroyed. Libyan jets were caught on the ground, bombed in their hardened shelters, shredded by precision strikes, or abandoned by fleeing pilots. Old MiG-23s, MiG-21s, and even French-built Mirages were reduced to burning hulks on the tarmacs of bases like Al Jufra and Matiga. There would be no dramatic final dogfights, no desperate last stands in the air. The remnants of Gaddafi's air force died ignobly on the ground, rusted and burned, without firing a shot, a stark contrast to the deadly aerial ballet that had played out in 1989. The world that had produced that earlier clash, one defined by ideological battles between superpowers, by daring young pilots and frontline technology, was gone. In its place stood a chaotic, fragmented Libya and a global landscape reshaped by new kinds of warfare, drones, cyber attacks, and insurgencies. The enduring lesson: pilot skill above all. Yet, despite the decades of change, despite the advances in technology and the shifts in political winds, one lesson from that cold January day still stands. As Navy historian Dr. John Sherwood succinctly put it, this engagement proved even in the missile age, pilot skill decides fights. It is easy to be dazzled by the raw statistics of modern weaponry, Mach speeds, radar ranges, missile kill probabilities, but at the end of the day, war remains a human endeavor. In that Mediterranean clash, it wasn't just technology that won the battle, it was the hands, eyes, and instincts of the pilots, men trained to the razor's edge, trusting in themselves, their machines, and their wingmen. It was the split-second decision-making of Lieutenant Cook and Commander Enright. It was the seamless teamwork between pilot and RIO. It was the cool nerves under pressure, the precise energy management in maneuvers, the decisive aggression when opportunity presented itself. These human factors, the ability to adapt, react, and overcome, remain eternal. No amount of computerization or automation can replace the sheer necessity of courage, training, and experience in the deadly chess game of aerial combat. The legacy lives on, today. The F-14 Tomcat lives on in memory in museums and in the hearts of those who watched it fly. The battle off the Libyan coast in 1989 stands as one of its final shining moments, a reminder of what American air power meant during the closing chapters of the Cold War. It reminds older generations of a time when boldness was rewarded, when freedom of navigation was defended at any cost, and when the sound of freedom roared from the twin engines of a Tomcat streaking across the blue. And it teaches newer generations a simple, eternal truth. In every age, under every sky, it is the human spirit that ultimately carries the day.